Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Mimi Rocah back with us. We'll chat with Mimi in just a moment, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and to be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Mimi Rocah is an attorney who served as district attorney of Westchester County, New York from 2021 to 2024. Prior to becoming district attorney, she served as an assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York for nearly 17 years, where she prosecuted and oversaw cases involving violent crime, organized crime, human trafficking, sex trafficking, child exploitation, frauds, and public corruption. She's a frequent commentator on MSNOW, CNN, The Contrarian, Cafe, and numerous podcasts and radio shows on topics relating to law, justice, and women's issues, and has written and published dozens of opinion pieces on those topics. She's an expert in the rule of law, democracy, and the corruption and abuse of the justice system, and is currently an adjunct professor at Fordham University's School of Law. And Mimi is writing a book, Justice Under Siege, about the Trump administration's political takeover of the Department of Justice and the heroes who have stood up. This book is due out in September of this year. Mimi, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be with you again.
So, this Pam Bondi testimony. Oh, man, where do we begin?
Yeah, I made myself watch it, but it was hard because it was so infuriating. I mean, first of all, I think that the thing to focus on the most, frankly, is her clear, utter disdain, contempt, lack of respect for the Epstein survivors. I mean, they were in the room. She wouldn't even turn around and look at them. When different congresspeople were talking about them, she would look down at her, little war book that she had. I cannot believe that this is the person who is leading the Department of Justice. I mean, the Department of Justice that I know and that has existed for decades, its primary goal, focus, mission is to serve victims. And she talks a good line. It's like the words coming out of her mouth about all the cases she did and the experience she has as working with sexual assault survivors and victims of all kind are the right words, but they're so clearly false, at least with applied to these survivors. And the only way to reconcile those two things is that there's a different agenda above and beyond these victims that she is serving, as opposed to, it's not that she doesn't care about any victims, I guess. I mean, sure, I believe that she has experience as a prosecutor doing that. I believe that when she talks about crime victims of murders, et cetera, she cares about them. But these victims present a political problem for the person she is most loyal to. And so therefore, they are in a different category. And that is a prime example of how the DOJ has been taken over by politics, infected from the top, not all the way down, but the top for sure, and corrupted. And it was so sad to watch. And I felt so bad for the survivors who I have heard. It was really traumatic for them.
Yeah, I mean, how could it not be? I mean, there's a photo that will become iconic of her sitting and kind of just like looking down at her paperwork as the survivors all stood behind her. I think it was when Dan Goldman asked them to stand up. And that photo will haunt her for the rest of her life, because all she needed to do was just turn around and just make some kind of facial gesture of compassion or empathy. And she couldn't even do that. But, the thing is, what you were saying about the Justice Department and how it's corrupted, you could say that about the entire administration. Like, what I saw yesterday in Bondi was, maybe there was some kind of decent human being in there somewhere. And that's when the right words sometimes come out. But somehow, like so many others in the administration, Marco Rubio, Vance, people who have had a past, we've seen them. There's audio and video of things they have said and done in the past, including condemn Donald Trump. It's like the psychology has taken over. They've all become in a cult. And so in this case, to your point, I think the mission is Operation Cover Up. And that's all she can see. And it was such a disturbing spectacle to watch. I mean, she used the word circus a few times to attack the Democrats, but she's the one that created that circus.
Yeah, and two follow-ups to what you just said. I mean, I know Todd Blanche very personally. I worked with him very closely throughout his time at SDMI. We were friends, and then we were co-chiefs of the White Plains division of SDMI for over a year and a half. So I worked with him day in and day out. So this is someone that I not only know had a past, I was part of that past. And I know exactly what he learned, what his values were, how he was taught, who his mentors were. And, you know, I'm not alone in the Southern District of New York community and being shocked at what he has turned into, including someone who so dismissively said, well, you know, it's not a crime to party with Jeffrey Epstein, which may literally be true in some cases, but is one, it depends on your definition of partying, and two, is absolutely not the role of, again, the Deputy Attorney General. That might be some bro friend of Trump's that says that, maybe even like the White House political arm. And so to that point, I just, you know, and I'm writing a book on this, so I'm deeply embedded in it. While it is true that we see it throughout the administration and we can look at examples of it being corrupted everywhere, I think the level of corruption at DOJ in particular has to stand out because it isn't just, it is, first of all, cases being ordered, brought, directed by the president. We have never had that before. I mean, sure, there are people who will argue that somehow Biden had this conspiracy, you know, to prosecute Trump through Alvin Bragg, but okay, but they're not even hiding it anymore. I mean, it is outwardly being directed that the president of the United States somehow gets to decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. And Bondi jumps and says, okay, who gets investigated with respect to Epstein? And Bondi says, okay. And then we also have the political vocabulary that Trump and his political arm, which they're entitled to have, use, that is now being used by the leaders of the Department of Justice. I guess that's my point. So it is so, and we have never, ever had that before. So it's so corrupted and so infected. It's beyond anything we've ever seen. The other thing about her testimony that was, you know, I guess shouldn't be surprising, but is still worth commenting on, is she acted as if every question was an attack, which, I mean, granted, they were critical questions in many parts coming from the Democrats, but that's the whole point of a hearing. They are allowed to sort of cross-examine her and ask her and press her. And instead of obviously answering the questions, she would pull out of, you know, her opposition research book, oh, well, this crime happened in your state. So I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to yell back at you. And I'm going to talk about that horrific murder that happened in your state, which is, you know, the definition of whataboutism. I mean, we can all agree that the horrific murders that she pulled out are horrific. I'm sure most Democrats would agree with that. One, that just doesn't answer the question that she was there legitimately under Congress's legitimate oversight to ask her. And so her total, sort of disregard for the process. And I know, you know, every leader of every agency, nobody likes it, but most of them, no matter which party it is, they either respectfully answer the question or respectfully dodge the question in a different way. But they don't go and sort of throw back an attack in a political way. And talking about the stock market, how is that something for the Department of Justice leadership to be talking about?
She was not there as Attorney General.
Right. Exactly.
Whenever she speaks, whether it's at a hearing or on Fox, she sounds like she's his personal lawyer. She sounds like she's his comms director or his publicist or his girlfriend. I mean, it is so twisted that you don't know who you're watching. Like, and then when she said something about, she was like, the Dow. And she then made the mistake, but she cut herself up. She was like, it's up $50,000. And I was like, did she just say dollars? And she said dollars. But then she stopped. That was the point where people were laughing. And she's like, what are you laughing about? Oh, we're laughing about you're mentioning the stock market when you were asked about the Epstein case. But
She barely stopped. I felt like she kept going for a while.
yeah, but you served as a district attorney. You were in that job in Westchester County for several years. I can't imagine what it must have felt like for you to watch that, knowing what that role is supposed to be and who it's supposed to serve, and just seeing this travesty of justice and a dereliction of duty that we have never experienced ever before on any conceivable level.
Yeah, I mean, it would be the equivalent of if my office, when I was running it as a DA, were, not doing its job and not prosecuting cases and investigating legitimate cases. And I said, well, but, the economy's doing really well, so who cares? I mean, obviously, I would never say that. It is, I think, as the former leader of a prosecutor's office, it is just astounding to me that she wouldn't even want to build her own record as a successful leader of that department, which is such an honorable job that she could have as a source of pride for the rest of her life, instead of, debasing herself in this way. But as a former DOJ alum for, almost 17 years, it's heartbreaking. And that is what I hear over and over and over from DOJ alums, FBI alums, and people still in the office. It just, it didn't matter what administrations we were serving. I was sworn in under John Ashcroft. It's not like I agreed with everything that was happening, but the mission of the Department of Justice was very clear. And it was repeated by every attorney general, no matter who nominated them, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. It was, we seek justice. We do the right thing. We answer to the Constitution and the rule of law, not a particular person. And now it's not just, as you said, that it's not just that it's been turned on its head, it's that they're saying that out loud. They are saying, if you want to work here, you have to agree with and be willing to advocate for the president's political agenda. Now, that, political priorities, sure, they get to set. Do we prosecute more immigration crimes? Do we seek higher sentences on drug crimes? Do we prosecute more gang cases, et cetera? That's happened in every change of administration. But what they're really saying, again, not really hiding it, is you have to be willing to go along with our agenda, regardless of whether it is legal or not, regardless of whether a court tells you no, regardless of whether you feel it violates your ethical obligations as an attorney or candor to the court. Because they've shown that, not only in questions now for being hired, but also in firing people or forcing resignations of people who wouldn't go along with those. So the message is, if you're here, you have to go along no matter what, and you can't have your own ethical, moral, legal compass. And again, that is just not, it's not just that it's not what happened before, it's that it should not be what is happening ever in the Department of Justice.
Well, in your capacity as district attorney, you prosecuted organized crime cases. Doesn't this just seem like not a political administration, but more like a mob? When you think about how it literally is functioning on the day-to-day, how, Pam Bondi, the attorney general, was there, more like, Tom was in The Godfather, the consigliere, the protection rackets, the extortion, the pledges to omerta, it's literally like watching Godfather 4, and he's the Godfather. And if you cross him, if you're his enemy, you're going to get whatever power he has unleashed on you. And we can all be encouraged by the fact that grand juries are refusing to grant him the power to create crimes so that his opponents can be prosecuted. We just had a big case this week, the 6 Democrats who made that controversial video about military refusing illegal orders. So do you see it that way? Does it sort of take you back to your days fighting organized crime?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this since, 2016, 2017. I mean, Trump has always acted like a mob boss. And he has always wanted lawyers around him who were like mob lawyers, who didn't take notes, who were willing to deliver messages, coded messages that were implicit threats. Now, again, in this term, we see it all out in the open. And it is not just him or one or two people around him. It is the machinery of the entire administration and the Department of Justice. That is a very powerful piece of machinery to have as leverage against your enemies, opponents, people you want to bring into submission, and institutions, right? I mean, the whole thing with the law firms and the executive orders at the beginning of the term, they came out very quickly with those. And what it did, the single biggest consequence of that was that and we can criticize law firms and lawyers, and that's my profession. So, I'm more than happy to call it out. They cowed them into submission. And so you have not seen the same robust response from law firms to the lawlessness that we did in Trump's first term. They're much less willing to work on cases challenging the administration, pro bono cases, putting their names on letters, et cetera. And, we can debate what that means about the legal profession, but we also shouldn't have an administration that in a very calculated way sort of not only made it happen, but planned for it to happen. It was part of the strategy of, okay, last time these law firms kind of got in our way. They were a formidable opponent. And that's what lawyers are supposed to do. They're supposed to bring challenges. But this time they very effectively did away with that in the beginning. And you're right, this sort of pledge of loyalty, no matter what, is very, very reminiscent of my mob prosecutor days at SDNY, actually. And, going after the people who turned on that, right? The cooperators were the main targets. And here, the equivalent of a cooperator is someone who won't go along with it. I will say, in addition to grand juries, which you're right, we've seen this remarkable sort of renaissance, if you will, of grand juries. No one ever talked about grand juries before because they weren't really a factor. And frankly, I think that's because prosecutors used incredible discretion in what cases they brought to grand juries. It's not just that the standard is lower, et cetera, but prosecutors didn't bring every case they could. They brought the cases that were worthy of being brought, both in an evidentiary way and a sort of worthy case. Now that is not happening. But what's interesting and hopeful, I think, is that it's not being brought by the career prosecutors who are left at DOJ. Some of them have resigned or let themselves be fired rather than work on the Comey case, the Tish James, the entire Eastern District of Virginia. Basically, we can tell. I mean, I don't know from what they said, but we know that none of them were willing to work on those cases, either in the grand jury or stand up in court once they were indicted, because they had to bring in prosecutors from the outside to do it. And they found some prosecutor from, I forget where, Kentucky, Alabama, somewhere. But, and they had to bring in Lindsay Halligan and install her. So it's heartening to me to see that response. Not surprising, because again, these are people who are all trained like I was about, the rule of law, and they are refusing to bend to that. And then we saw it in Minnesota when so many prosecutors unfortunately resigned because they weren't going to be part of this investigating the victim instead of the perpetrator. And we now just saw it in the case you referred to that the grand jury rejected about Mark Kelly, et cetera. But we also know that, again, it was not career prosecutors. Jeanine Pirro brought in her own like prosecutors for hire kind of thing. People she used to work with at my old office, the Westchester DA's office, was at least one of them. So they're having to go around the career professionals, right? It's like going into a hospital and saying, well, I don't want the doctor that's there and trained and an expert to work on it because they don't want to work on it. I'm going to bring in some hack who doesn't know what they're doing and make them do it, and they'll try it and they're going to fail. And it's sad because it means we are losing so much expertise and principle from the Department of Justice. But it also is at the same time heartening to me that so many people there are not going along with it, and why we have to be careful when we talk about the corruption of DOJ to distinguish between the corruption at the top versus the people who populate it.
Yeah. There were a couple of what I thought were really pivotal moments yesterday in the questioning, putting aside her ridiculous temperamental behavior. And I mean, I thought at times I was, I don't know if you have children or if they're what ages they are, but like I've raised a bunch of teenagers, and literally it was like, oh my God, she sounds 15. Like I literally walked in and said, clean your room. And the answer she's giving Congress is the answers I used to get to when teenagers. Okay. The questioning from Congressman Dan Goldman and Congressman Ted Lieu. Ted Lieu showed a picture of Prince Andrew literally like hovering over a young woman on the ground, and her face was blacked out, and he got Bondi to admit that it was blacked out because she was a survivor, a victim. But then he said, so then you're lying under oath when you say there's nobody to investigate or prosecute because we're looking at a crime right now. So that's number one. I want to ask you if you think she did lie under oath. And number two, Goldman brought up that whole issue of emails, and they got into this wonky back and forth about privilege, which seemed nuts, that if Epstein sends an email to Maxwell, that's privilege. And she literally went, privilege.
Yeah.
Like, what law school did you go to? So what are your thoughts on those two moments in the hearing?
I mean, I do love watching Dan, also a friend and former colleague, in action. His prosecutor skills, really come out, I think, in these kinds of hearings. He's very good at zoning in on the issue, and he's done it repeatedly with different members of this administration. I mean, he will get to the bottom of that. Like, it is so obviously not privilege. I don't know when he'll be able to do that. It may not be until and if Democrats are back in power, but that whatever is in that email is going to have to come out, because unless they just, again, and we can't, assume this isn't going to happen unless they completely defy the law, but that could happen. I think as to whether she lied under oath, there is no question that both she and Patel have been dishonest with the American people about what the takeaways are and what the next steps could be and should be, frankly, right? There is investigation to be done. I think they have been very cute and careful in trying to rely on what is normally a valid thing to rely on, which is we don't have usable, credible evidence to charge anyone at this time. I have said that before too, when it's true. You usually say that at the end of an investigation when you've exhausted all investigative leads, however. What they're doing here is they're saying it and skipping the investigative step. There was an investigation that I think was quite broad and thorough in the Southern District of New York in 2019 that resulted in the first ever federal charges against Maxwell and significant federal charges against Epstein that would have been carried through for the first time had he not killed himself. However, that stopped at some point, I think in part because I think, there was only so far they could go. The first Trump administration didn't stop it altogether, but I don't think they were going to let it go any further. And I think there was a limit as to who at that time was willing to come forward. But that landscape has changed. We know that because we literally see the survivors there now in a way that they never could have done before. And I'm not blaming them, but just saying that things change and there is more investigation to be done. Prince Andrew is now no longer Prince Andrew, and he should be, they should try again. It seems that leadership in England is much more willing to give him over and let him be interviewed. So I don't know whether they lied under oath in a way that is perjurious. We have to be very careful with that. I think they very sloppily tried to do that with Comey when it wasn't warranted. But that shouldn't be the standard. They have not been forthcoming about what is in the files. It is a cover-up in the sense that they just want this to go away. They don't want to do what the survivors and the American public, frankly, want them to do. And the reason they don't want to do that is because Trump doesn't want them to do it. It's a political headache. And from day one, they've made clear they just want this to go away. And it's fine for Trump to want it to go away. He's allowed to say that. He's allowed to, I guess. But it's not okay for the Department of Justice to act like it should just go away.
Yeah, well, I think the problem a lot of people have is that, to your point, it's not that they, may have misspoken and not necessarily lied. They're clearly just dismissive of the whole process. I mean, this whole thing with Les Wexner, when it was presented to them and they fixed it, they didn't take an attitude of, oh my God, there must be a lot more. We're going to take a look at this, and they were just defiant and rude and dismissive. And that speaks to a cover-up. Last quick question. I happen to personally think Rocah and Thomas Massie are this generation's Woodward and Bernstein, that they are eventually going to take down a president. Maybe that's just me being naive or hopeful, but do you think there's ever going to be real accountability? And do you think that ultimately it is not going to end well for Donald Trump in particular?
You're asking specifically about Epstein.
Yes.
I actually just wrote an article with Joyce Vance about what the Department of Justice should be doing in the Contrarian, what the Department of Justice should be doing in terms of what we were just talking about, in terms of further investigation, and if they won't, Congress should. I think that the possibility of criminal accountability for anyone is, to be honest, slim at this point, because the window to do it further is now, and this Department of Justice and FBI are not going to do it. I don't think that will happen. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that will happen. And all the reasons why. The whole idea of local prosecutors doing it, I don't think realistically that is going to happen for various reasons we don't have time to discuss, but I do think that Congress can do a lot because of what the survivors, yes, they want criminal charges against people, of course, but I think what they really want is exposure, knowledge of who did what, when, what the government knew, why they covered it up back in Florida. We still don't have answers to that. That is more of a transparency and exposure issue. And then there are other ways to have accountability. And we are seeing it, frankly, around the world. And even in America, in, certain limited places like Larry Sumner stepping back, Brad Karp stepping down. I'm not saying any of this is fully satisfying, but there's little drops of accountability. We still have the president of the United States, though, who clearly has not been truthful about what at a minimum, has not been truthful about what he knew about Epstein. We know that now because in 2019, a Palm Beach, the head of the Palm Beach police was interviewed and said, oh yeah, back then, Trump called and said, this guy's awful and he does awful things. We could talk about how self-serving that call from Trump was back then, but the point is, he knew, and he has denied knowing ever since then. Is there more to it than him just knowing? I don't know, sitting here right now. Do I think there could be an investigation? And you start with asking him, well, what did you mean when you said everybody knew. What did you mean when you said Maxwell's evil? I mean, there are a million, and he's supposedly so innocent, he shouldn't even invoke the Fifth on that, right? Because he claims he did nothing wrong. So there were so many angles to go. And if it's not going to happen from DOJ, then I hope Congress has an opportunity to do it after November, because both Republicans and Democrats, as Massey and Rocah have shown, this is one of the few little sort of bipartisan issues.
Justice Under Siege. That's the book you're writing.
Yes.
You want to take a moment and tell us about it?
I mean, it's really everything we've been talking about, but it is, I'm really trying to demonstrate both through stories like this that we're talking about, events like this, and also people's stories who have stood up, who have suffered from this, how different this is. I think it's so easy. And we saw this even in the press coverage of Bondi's hearing a little bit. It was, Democrats and Bondi trade insults. No, that is not what happened. I am not a partisan person in the sense that I'm going to defend everything a Democrat does always. 100% not. I don't have that kind of sort of party loyalty. What I'm trying to explain is that what she is doing, what the DOJ is doing, is so different and out of bounds that it has to be called out, and we have to explain how it's different and why it's so dangerous. So that's what I'm trying to do in my book.
Well, good luck with the process, and look forward to having you back on to talk about it. Come back on before that, because there's going to be a lot to talk about. Great conversation, great insights. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be with you.
All righty, take care.
Bye.
This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.